In this final episode, we'll revisit woodland planted by Moor trees 2 years, 5 years, 10 years and 20 years ago. We'll talk through the care for after planting and hear about the ways in which the woods have transformed the landscape and wildlife.
We revisit woodland in the first and second year after planting, and then also again in years 5, 10, 15, 20 and so on. The reason we visit in years 1 and 2 after the planting is to make sure that the trees have taken and that they are growing. In years 5 and 10, we'll be doing surveys, we'll be checking on the trees' health, any pest and disease issues, and also we will be taking and releasing trees from tree shelters and guards. And this is so that as the forest grows and the canopy comes together, it becomes a functioning woodland. When you return to your woodlands, do remember to contact the landowner and get permission to be there. Remember to bring the tools that you may need to remove guards, for example, and also any surveying equipment required. This is a woodland we planted 2 years ago, and I'm here to do our survey, and I'll tell you what I'm looking for along the way. We're checking that the trees have come out of the tree shelters, that the leaf shape is what we expect for that tree, and also the right colour. If it was too yellow, we'd know that some of those trees may be suffering drought stress or other problems. Similarly, if the leaves are too small, the trees will be under stress again. We're also looking for some trees which may not come out of their shelters, because we want to check if that tree's alive or it's dead. I can see this tree over here is not out of its shelter, so very quickly I take a peek down. We've got a young oak in here, obviously growing much slower than the rest. We don't know why, but at the same time it's alive and the leaf colour is good, so I'm not concerned. So we've been walking through this site and we found 3 things which need attention. This tube, no tree was coming out to the top of it. We've checked in the tube, the tree's dead, so we've marked the tube and that tree will be replaced. We have this tree here in the middle, and you can see that one of its branches at the top has died back. If you have the time, it's useful to just prune these out. And that means that this leader then is free to go. And we've also got this tree shelter which has come loose. So very simply, bring your trusty hammer, knock the stake back in, tighten the ties, and the tree is in there growing healthily. This woodland was planted 5 years ago on a normal grazed field to which fertilisers have been added. It was a flat green desert with compacted soils and little biodiversity. Within 5 years we have many trees growing: oak, birch, hornbeam, field maple, hawthorn, and we are here doing our 5-year woodland tree survey, and we found a dead tree, and so what we'll be doing is removing this tree shelter. There are not many dead trees here, and we would expect some at 5 years. In 20 years, we planted over 100,000 trees, and less than 3% of those died in that time. This woodland is being planted with about 1,100 trees per hectare, which means they are quite close together. But what we have also done is left a wide margin around the edges between the older, mature trees on the edge and the new woodland we've planted. And this is because we don't want to plant our young trees under the shade, under the canopy of these older trees. But also these wide margins are really good for some birds, animals and insects that love to live and feed in these areas. If you would come here at night, you would see bats zooming up and down, feeding on the insects in these margins. We've also not planted trees underneath the power lines, and this is simply so that when the trees grow up, they don't interrupt with the power service. But equally, it is another great excuse to create a woodland margin. Without the grazing, there are many more plants here because they've been allowed to seed and spread. So the area is buzzing and is alive with butterflies and with bees and with crickets. So the trees are healthy, they're coming out of their shelters, and in time they will start to join their canopies to form a proper woodland. In our 10-year-old woodland, the canopy is almost closed. It's much darker and it's much cooler here. The lack of light has suppressed the bracken, and we're starting to see more of the plants that we would expect to see on this woodland floor. And as the years go on, those plants will thrive. We've done our survey and we are concerned about the tree shelters. Trees are now of the age where many of them are bursting out, and these tree shelters can rub and sometimes cause significant damage to the trees. So we'll be going around and removing some of those today. And this is why it's really important to revisit your woodlands and continue to take care of them in the years to come. Moor Trees planted this woodland about 20 years ago, and we planted it with native broadleaf trees like oak, ash, birch, some cherry, hazel, and some of those trees you can see behind us. In a healthy woodland of this age, we would expect the canopy to have closed like this, and you can see it's much darker underneath. And with this, some plants have been suppressed and other plants have started to come out. The bracken is much lower, and things like dog's mercury and bluebell are starting to appear. In our woodland survey today, we found some good things and some bad things. So of the good things, the elder behind me and the hazel here, they're doing what I would expect them to see at 20 years of age and looking good. But unfortunately, grey squirrels have arrived and they have been stripping the bark of some of these young oak trees, unfortunately killing them. Also, you can see there's a lot of blue sky behind me, and 20 years ago we were planting with ash here. Since then, ash dieback has arrived and has killed much of those trees. But we're no longer allowed to replant with ash, so we'll be discussing with the landowner what other tree species he would like us to plant with him. Once those trees have been planted and they start to close their canopy, we will find much less light coming to the forest floor, and we will therefore see plants like the bracken not growing so vigorously. Some of the benefits that we've seen in planting this woodland are to do with the landscape and for biodiversity. It's been planted on a very steep slope, and this has reduced the runoff from the rain and soil moving from the fields to the river below. For biodiversity, we have been surrounded by some older woodland, but this has filled in a gap, which has allowed the animals and the birds and so forth that live in those woods to expand their range. Some of those animals, birds for example, dormice and bats, have been able to enjoy this developing new woodland.
Planting your trees may seem like the end of the process, but they will need your care and attention for a few years after planting. Regular surveys and health checks ensure the woodland has a strong foundation. And of course, you'll want to visit simply for the joy of seeing your trees grow and witnessing and even recording the huge benefits for people and wildlife.